The moment everything started to unravel wasn't dramatic.
No screaming fights, no suspicious texts on my wife's phone, no half-heard whispers late at night. It started with a stranger. A woman I had never seen before. It was at a corporate event, one of those tedious networking parties that my wife, Emma, insisted I attend. She worked in finance, and these events were supposedly good for building connections. To me, it was just an excuse for overpaid executives to get drunk and talk about how important they were.
I had just gotten my second drink when I noticed her. She wasn't my wife.
She was blonde, early 30s, wearing a tight black dress that fit a little too well.
But it wasn't her looks that caught my attention. It was the way she was looking at a man across the room. Daniel Mercer.
I didn't know his name yet, but I recognized his type immediately: confident, smooth, the kind of guy who knew exactly how to manipulate a conversation, how to make people feel like he was the most important person in the room. The blonde woman was staring at him like he was the only person who existed.
And the way he looked back at her? That told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't an innocent office friendship.
I watched them carefully, sipping my drink, pretending to be absorbed in the background chatter. She leaned toward him when she laughed. His hand hovered just a little too close to her hip.
Their eyes lingered on each other for a second longer than necessary.
I had no reason to care.
I didn't know these people. But something about it stuck with me. I scanned the room, looking for Emma.
She was standing near the bar, talking to a colleague, oblivious to what I was seeing. Later that night, I saw Daniel and the blonde woman slip out through a side door, the kind of exit people use when they don't want to be seen leaving together.
I followed, keeping my distance.
Outside, in the dimly lit back area of the venue, they stood close, talking in hushed voices. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw the way his hand brushed her arm, how she leaned into him. And then, he kissed her.
I clenched my fists. This guy was married.
I didn't know him personally, but I had overheard someone mentioning his wife earlier in the night.
I stepped back before they could notice me and went back inside. I didn't say anything to Emma about what I saw. There was no reason to. This wasn't my business.
Or so I thought. The next day, the image of them together was still bothering me.
I don't know why.
Maybe it was the way they were so comfortable, how obvious it all was once you knew what to look for.
So I started digging. I found out his name: Daniel Mercer, a senior executive.
He had been married for 5 years.
His wife didn't attend company events often. I found the blonde woman, too. Her name was Julia.
She was also married.
2 people risking everything for an affair. Messy. But not my problem. Except something didn't sit right. I kept thinking about the way Daniel acted at the party.
The way he moved through the room, scanning, evaluating. He didn't act like a man who had one affair. He acted like a man who had more than one.
So I kept watching.
Over the next few weeks, I started paying attention whenever Emma mentioned work. I listened for Daniel's name, waited for any sign that she knew him beyond a professional level. I even checked her social media, casual, nothing obsessive, just to see if he ever appeared in photos or comments.
Nothing. But then, one evening, Emma mentioned a last-minute dinner meeting with colleagues.
She said it was routine, that she'd be home late. I didn't think much of it until I checked the location of the restaurant. It was the same place I had seen Daniel at 2 days before.
Coincidence? Maybe. But I wasn't leaving it to chance.
I drove to the restaurant and parked across the street, far enough away that I wouldn't be noticed.
I wasn't even sure what I was looking for. A glimpse of him? Maybe Julia, the blonde woman? I waited. Then I saw her. Not my wife. A different woman. She was brunette, mid-30s, wearing a navy blue dress.
And she was sitting with Daniel.
Not in a business meeting.
In a private booth, alone.
Another mistress. I watched them for over an hour.
They talked, laughed, leaned in close. And then, just like before, they left together. I followed at a distance, watching as they got into separate cars. But instead of driving home, the woman drove to a hotel on the other side of the city.
20 minutes later, Daniel arrived. 2 mistresses. 2 separate affairs.
I thought I had cracked the pattern.
Daniel Mercer was cheating with 2 women, Julia, the blonde, and this brunette from the restaurant.
I had no reason to believe Emma was involved.
But I was wrong. Very wrong. The next morning, Emma left for work as usual.
I waited an hour, then I drove to Daniel's office. I sat in my car across the street, watching employees come and go.
And then, I saw her. Not Julia. Not the brunette. Emma.
She was walking toward the building, moving fast, her expression tense.
She wasn't carrying a work bag. She wasn't dressed like she usually was for meetings.
She looked nervous. And then, I saw Daniel step outside. He looked around, then motioned for her to follow him.
She did.
They disappeared around the corner, where a private entrance led to the underground parking lot. I felt something in my chest tighten, like my ribs were caving in.
This wasn't a business meeting.
This wasn't a friendly conversation.
Emma was the 3rd mistress.
I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, watching as my wife disappeared into the parking lot with a man who already had 2 other women wrapped around his finger. I had spent weeks following the wrong trail, thinking Daniel's affairs were none of my concern.
But now?
Now, this was personal. I stayed in my car, watching the entrance to the underground parking lot. My breathing was slow and controlled, but beneath that calm exterior, something ugly was taking shape.
It had taken weeks to get here. Weeks of suspicion, of watching Daniel weave his affairs into the background of his everyday life.
First, there was Julia, the blonde. Then, there was the brunette from the restaurant.
I had thought that was it.
That I had uncovered the extent of his lies.
But I had been wrong. Because the 3rd mistress wasn't some unknown woman. It was my wife. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel.
I wanted to storm in, to demand answers, to see the look on her face when she realized that I knew. But that wasn't the right move, not yet.
Emma had been careful.
She had been playing this game far longer than I had realized. And if she had managed to keep this from me for so long, she wasn't going to break easily.
I needed to be smart. I glanced at the time. 17 minutes. Emma still hadn't come back up.
A few moments later, the security door to the building opened, and Daniel emerged.
Alone.
He wasn't rushed, wasn't looking around nervously. He adjusted his suit jacket, checked his phone, and casually walked back inside as if nothing had happened. Like this was just another part of his daily routine.
But Emma was still down there. That told me everything I needed to know.
I got out of my car and walked across the street, keeping my pace measured. The parking lot entrance had a security gate, but I didn't stop there. I had already noticed a smaller, side entrance earlier, the kind of door that employees used when they didn't want to go through the main building.
I reached it and tested the handle. Locked.
But someone had wedged a piece of cardboard between the frame and the latch.
Sloppy.
I pushed the door open just enough to slip inside. The underground parking lot was dimly lit, stretching out in rows of expensive cars. I moved carefully, staying close to the concrete pillars, my footsteps muffled by the sound of distant engines and the hum of overhead lights.
Then I heard voices. I turned the corner and saw them.
Emma was leaning against a black car, arms crossed, looking down at her phone.
But she wasn't alone.
The brunette from the restaurant was standing next to her. For a second, I just stood there, hidden behind a pillar, my mind struggling to piece together what I was seeing.
They weren't fighting. They weren't avoiding each other. They were talking. And that's when I understood. This wasn't just an affair. It was coordinated.
I slowed my breathing, listening. "Are you sure he's not getting suspicious?" the brunette asked.
Emma sighed. If he was, I'd know. He's been acting normal. Good. The brunette nodded. Daniel said Julia's husband almost caught her last week. He's getting paranoid. Julia. The blonde mistress. Emma shook her head. She's careless. I don't know how she hasn't been caught yet. My chest tightened. I had spent weeks watching Daniel's affairs unfold, thinking my own wife was just another uninvolved observer. But now I knew the truth. She wasn't just cheating. She was part of a system. Daniel wasn't managing separate affairs, he was juggling them like pieces of a machine, and all three of his mistresses were aware of each other. Emma knew about Julia. Emma knew about the brunette. And worse, Emma knew I existed. She knew I was at home, trusting her, waiting for her. And she didn't care. I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms. Every instinct in me told me to walk over there, to let her see me, to watch the horror dawn on her face. But I stayed still. Because now I had something far more valuable than anger. I had certainty. And when I confronted her, she was going to have nowhere to run. I took a slow step back, then another. I moved carefully, making sure I didn't make a sound. Then I turned and walked out of the parking lot. When I got back to my car, I sat there, staring at my hands. They weren't shaking. I wasn't panicked. I wasn't even breathing hard. I had thought that finding out my wife was cheating would make me lose control. That I would feel an overwhelming urge to scream, to break something, to do anything to release the betrayal that was sitting in my gut like a weight. But I didn't feel any of that. I felt focused. My phone buzzed. I looked down. A message from Emma. Heading home soon. Want me to pick up anything? I stared at the screen for a moment before locking my phone and setting it down. She was so confident. So sure that I was still blind to what she was doing. She had no idea that everything was about to change. That night, I didn't say anything. Emma came home at her usual time. She kissed me on the cheek, set her purse down, and made small talk like she always did. I responded the way I always did. She moved around the house like normal. Took a shower. Changed into her pajamas. Climbed into bed beside me like nothing had happened. I lay next to her, staring at the ceiling, my body still, my thoughts racing. I could feel the warmth of her body next to mine. I could hear her slow, even breathing as she drifted off to sleep. And I wondered how many times Daniel had been this close to her. How many times she had laughed with him the way she used to laugh with me. How many times she had lied with the same ease that she told me she loved me. I turned my head slightly, looking at her face in the dim light. For years, she had been the one person I trusted beyond question. Now, she was just another liar. I closed my eyes, breathing slowly. Tomorrow, I would end this. Morning arrived like nothing had changed. The sun rose, the alarm went off, and Emma stretched beside me, her body warm under the covers. She got up, went through her routine, kissed me on the cheek, and left for work without a second thought. She had no idea that today was different. I let her go. Let her believe everything was normal. Then, I got to work. I had spent weeks watching Daniel Mercer, thinking I was investigating his affairs. But now, I knew I had been circling around my own wife's betrayal the entire time. Emma had been careful, too careful, which told me one thing: this had been going on for a long time. I needed confirmation. More than what I had already seen. Because when I confronted her, I wanted to take away any chance she had to lie. So I called in sick to work, grabbed a second phone, and went back to Daniel's office. I knew she wouldn't be expecting me. I parked across the street, watching the building, waiting. Emma wasn't stupid, she wouldn't risk meeting him inside the office. That was too obvious. They had patterns, and now that I knew what to look for, I was sure I'd find one. It took 4 hours. Then, I saw her. She left for lunch, but she didn't go to any of the nearby restaurants. Instead, she walked 2 blocks, turned down a side street, and entered a quiet boutique hotel. A few minutes later, Daniel arrived. That was all I needed. I waited. 30 minutes. 45. An hour.
Then they came out separately, 5 minutes apart.
Emma looked relaxed.
Smoothed down her skirt, checked her phone, walked back toward her office as if she had just finished a casual meal. I followed her, my steps controlled, my breathing steady. I didn't call out to her, didn't try to stop her.
Not yet. I went home and prepared.
By the time she returned that evening, I was sitting at the dining table, waiting.
She walked in, smiling.
"Hey," she said, dropping her bag on the counter.
"How was your day?" I didn't answer.
She frowned, stepping closer.
"Everything okay?"
I leaned back in my chair and folded my arms.
"Where were you for lunch?" Her expression didn't change immediately. Emma was good at this. Too good.
She gave me a casual shrug.
"I just grabbed something near the office." "Where?" She hesitated. "Just for a second. That new cafe on 5th. Lie." I exhaled slowly. "Try again." She froze. Just for a moment. Just long enough for me to see it.
Then she forced a small laugh.
"What are you talking about?" "I know where you were."
The smile on her face disappeared. I stood up, reached into my pocket, and tossed my phone onto the table in front of her. The screen was unlocked.
The photos were already pulled up. Her eyes flicked down.
And she saw them.
Horror. Walking into the hotel. Daniel. Arriving just after her. Horror. Leaving later, alone. Emma went pale.
Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for the phone, scrolling through the images.
I let her. I wanted her to see.
"I can explain," she said, her voice quieter now.
I laughed. Actually laughed. It wasn't humor, it was disbelief. That was the first thing she said? "Explain?" I repeated. "Go ahead. Explain it."
She opened her mouth, then closed it.
Then opened it again. "It's not what it looks like."
I slammed my hand down on the table, making her jump.
"Don't," I said. "Don't insult me."
She swallowed hard, blinking rapidly, her mind scrambling for an answer.
"A lie. How long?" I asked.
Her lips parted, but no sound came out.
"How long?"
She dropped her gaze. 6 months, she finally whispered.
I let that settle between us. 6 months. Half a year. I nodded slowly. "So you've been lying to me every day for half a year?" Her breathing was uneven now. "I never meant." "Never meant for what?" I snapped. "Never meant for me to find out?"
She flinched.
"No. I never meant for it to go this far." "This far?" I repeated. "So when was it supposed to stop, Emma?" She shook her head. "I don't know. I didn't plan it."
I let out a slow breath, pressing my fingers to my temples.
"And Julia? And the brunette? Did you know about them?"
Her face twisted in something between shock and shame.
"You did," I said before she could answer. "You knew the whole time, didn't you?" Emma pressed her lips together. "It wasn't like that." "It wasn't like that," I echoed. "You knew you weren't the only one, but you stayed. What does that make you?" She looked away. I clenched my jaw. "Did you ever even think about me?" She exhaled shakily. "I didn't want to hurt you." I stared at her. I had never heard something so pathetic in my life. "You didn't want to hurt me?" I said. "Then what the hell do you think this is?"
Tears welled in her eyes now, but I didn't care.
"You had options, Emma. You could have told me you weren't happy. You could have left." Her voice cracked. "I didn't want to leave." "Why?" I asked. "Because I was your backup plan?"
She sucked in a sharp breath.
No. I love you. I laughed again.
She still thought those words meant something.
I stepped back, shaking my head. You don't love me. You love having me. There's a difference. Emma's hands trembled. I'm sorry.
I studied her face, the regret, the fear, the realization that she had just lost everything.
Not yet, I said quietly. But you will be. And then I walked out of the room.
I walked out of the kitchen, leaving Emma standing there, silent, her body tense, her mind scrambling for control. She thought she still had time. Thought she could fix this if she found the right words. But there weren't any words that could undo what she had done. She was still in shock, trying to process the fact that I had caught her.
She hadn't reached the panic stage yet. That would come soon. I went straight to my office, shutting the door behind me. I didn't slam it. I didn't make any dramatic gestures. I didn't need to. The silence itself was heavy enough. I sat at my desk, staring at the open laptop in front of me. The folder was already there, waiting. Every piece of evidence. Photos. Screenshots. Call logs. All the proof I needed to bring everything down. I didn't hesitate. I opened my phone and pulled up the first contact. Rachel Mercer. Daniel's wife. We had never spoken before, but finding her information had been easy. Daniel, like any cheating narcissist, had built an online presence that painted him as a devoted family man. Anniversaries, vacations, pictures of their children. It was all there. He probably thought that by displaying his perfect marriage online, no one would suspect what he was doing behind closed doors. He was wrong. I composed the message carefully. Direct. Simple. Undeniable. Rachel, I think you deserve to know what's been going on. Your husband has been cheating on you with multiple women, including my wife. I have proof. I attached the photos. Not just of Emma. Of all of them. Then I hit send. There was no turning back now. But I wasn't done. Next was Julia's husband. I had found his contact after seeing Julia and Daniel together at the corporate event. He wasn't an easy man to track down, he kept a lower profile than Rachel, but his work email was public. I sent him the same message. Then I sent another one to the husband of the brunette mistress. 3 men. 3 marriages. I watched as the messages went through. I imagined their reactions, phones vibrating on nightstands, screens lighting up with the truth they never expected. Lives being shattered in real time. I exhaled slowly, my pulse steady. Emma had made a choice. Now, I had made mine. Then, I waited. The door handle rattled behind me. A soft knock. Can we talk? Emma's voice was quieter now. I didn't answer. A pause. Then, please. I let a few seconds pass before I stood up and unlocked the door. She was standing there, arms crossed, her face pale. She looked nervous now. Are you really not going to talk to me? She asked. I leaned against the doorframe. I already did. She swallowed. I mean, really talk. I know you're angry, but... You're right, I interrupted. I am angry. But that's not your biggest problem right now. Her brows furrowed. What does that mean? I tilted my head slightly. How long do you think it'll take for them to see it? Her breath caught in her throat. She blinked, confused for half a second. Then realization. I saw it in her eyes, the fear, the understanding that her world was about to collapse. You didn't. I did. She took a step back. You're lying. Check your phone. Her fingers trembled as she pulled her phone from her pocket. She tapped the screen, her eyes scanning rapidly. I watched her face. It didn't take long. Her expression twisted, panic setting in.
I didn't have to see what was on her screen to know what she was looking at.
Rachel's response. Julia's husband's response. The unraveling. Her breathing turned uneven. Oh my God. I crossed my arms, watching her. Now you get it. She looked up at me, pleading now. You don't understand what you've done. I laughed. What I've done?
She flinched at my tone.
You're acting like you didn't do this to yourself, I said.
She shook her head quickly, stepping closer. No, listen, Rachel is going to lose her mind.
If she finds out. She already knows. Emma's mouth snapped shut. She was trapped, and she knew it. She wasn't worried about me. She was worried about Rachel. Daniel's wife was the biggest threat in this entire mess.
The woman who had been lied to the longest, the one who had the most to lose.
If Rachel reacted badly, this wouldn't just end in divorce. It could destroy careers. Reputations. Everything. Emma's voice cracked. You don't know what she's capable of. I shrugged. Guess we're about to find out. She broke then.
Her shoulders shook, her breath coming out in short, uneven bursts.
You don't have to do this.
I stared at her, unmoved.
I already did. She took another shaky breath. We can fix this. I'll leave him. I'll do whatever you want. Just. I raised a hand. Stop.
Her lips pressed together.
You don't get to make deals, I said. You lost that privilege the second you decided I wasn't worth the truth.
Tears welled in her eyes now, but I didn't care. She had stood beside me for months, pretending. She had kissed me, slept next to me, told me she loved me, all while she knew she was sneaking off to another man.
Now, she wanted mercy. She wouldn't get it from me. My phone buzzed. I pulled it out and glanced at the screen. A message from Rachel. I want to meet. I smirked. I looked back at Emma, who was still staring at me, wide-eyed. Time's up, I said. You'll want to pack your things.
Then I walked past her, leaving her standing there, shaking.
Emma didn't follow me as I left the house.
She didn't beg, didn't scream, didn't try to argue her way out of this.
Maybe she was still processing it. Maybe she thought she could still salvage something. She was wrong.
I got in my car and drove. The streets were quiet, empty. My phone was still buzzing with messages: Rachel, Julia's husband, the brunette's husband. They were all in chaos now, their lives unraveling just as mine had.
But I wasn't thinking about them. I was thinking about what came next. Rachel had asked to meet Daniel's wife.
The woman who had been deceived just as much as I had.
I pulled into the parking lot of a quiet cafe on the outskirts of the city. It was late, and the place was nearly empty. A single car sat in the lot, parked under the dim glow of a street lamp. Rachel was already inside.
I stepped out, locked my car, and walked in. She was sitting at a booth near the back, her fingers curled around a cup of coffee, her eyes staring blankly at the table. She looked different from the carefully curated social media posts I had seen. In those pictures, she had always been smiling, always surrounded by family. Now, she just looked tired.
She glanced up as I approached.
"Sit," she said.
I slid into the seat across from her. Neither of us spoke right away. Finally, she let out a slow breath. How long have you known? Not long, I admitted. But long enough. She nodded.
I knew something was off, she said.
Daniel has always been good at lying, but lately. I don't know. Something changed.
I started noticing things.
The late nights, the work trips that didn't make sense.
I stayed quiet, letting her talk. I wanted to believe him, she continued. I told myself I was imagining things.
That I was being paranoid. That if I just ignored it, it would go away.
Her fingers tightened around her coffee cup.
But it didn't. I exhaled slowly. I did the same thing.
She looked up at me then, her expression unreadable. I spent weeks thinking Daniel was cheating with Julia, I said.
I followed the wrong trail. I thought my wife was just another bystander. Rachel's jaw tightened. Until you found out she wasn't. Until I found out she was part of it. Silence.
We sat there, two strangers connected by the same betrayal.
Rachel set her cup down and leaned forward slightly. So what now? I met her gaze. That depends. On what? On how far you want this to go. She didn't flinch. I want him ruined. I nodded.
Then we're on the same page.
She smirked slightly. I thought you'd say that.
I leaned back in my seat.
What's your plan? She tapped her nails against the table. Daniel built his entire reputation on being untouchable. He thinks he's careful. That's his weakness.
She reached into her bag and pulled out a flash drive, sliding it across the table to me.
What's this? Evidence, she said. Financial records. Emails. Things he wouldn't want getting out. I raised an eyebrow. You've been collecting this for a while. She shrugged. Let's just say I had my suspicions. I pocketed the flash drive. Rachel studied me for a moment. What about you? I already did my part, I said. I sent everything to the other husbands.
Their marriages are falling apart as we speak.
Her lips curled slightly. Good. I exhaled, running a hand through my hair. Emma knows what I did.
She saw the messages.
She knows it's over. Rachel tilted her head. And how does that feel? I thought about it.
About the moment Emma had realized she had lost everything. The way the color drained from her face. The way her hands had trembled. I looked at Rachel and gave her the only honest answer I could. Not as satisfying as I thought it would be. She nodded, like she understood. We sat there in silence for a while, neither of us in a rush to leave. Finally, Rachel stood. If you ever want to see how this all plays out, she said, you'll know where to find me. I watched as she walked out of the cafe, disappearing into the night. I didn't follow. Instead, I sat there, staring at the cup of coffee in front of me, wondering what the hell I was supposed to do now. I opened the front door and stepped inside. The house was silent. No movement, no sounds from upstairs or the kitchen, just the kind of stillness that told me she was waiting. I closed the door behind me and walked forward. Emma was sitting on the couch, hands clasped tightly in her lap, shoulders stiff. A packed suitcase sat beside her. She had listened. She had understood. She knew there was no talking her way out of this. Her eyes were swollen. She had been crying. I could tell from the redness on her cheeks, the way her breaths came unevenly. It didn't matter. There wasn't any part of me that felt anything for her anymore. Whatever guilt or sadness she wanted me to see, it wasn't for me. It was for herself. She wasn't mourning the loss of our marriage, she was mourning the fact that she had lost control over me. I didn't speak. There was nothing left to say. I walked past her and headed upstairs. The closet door was open, and some of her clothes were missing. She had packed fast. Probably grabbed whatever she could fit into a suitcase, knowing she wouldn't have the chance to take everything. I had told her to leave, and she had obeyed, but the rest of her things were untouched. She must have known she wouldn't be able to come back for them. The bedroom looked the same as it always had, but it didn't feel like my space anymore. I stood in the doorway for a moment, staring at the bed, remembering the nights she had laid there beside me. She had kissed me, curled up against me, fallen asleep like she had done nothing wrong. I didn't feel anger. Not anymore. I had spent too much time thinking about those moments, replaying them, analyzing them, wondering how I could have missed the signs. The anger had burned out, leaving behind nothing but exhaustion. I grabbed a duffel bag from the closet and started packing. I wasn't staying in this house. She wasn't the only one leaving. The walls, the furniture, the memories, I didn't want any of it.
This place wasn't mine anymore. It was just a reminder of something that had already ended.
Downstairs, she hadn't moved. Her hands gripped the handle of her suitcase, her knuckles white. She was waiting for me to say something. Maybe one last fight, one last chance to explain herself.
I wasn't giving her that.
I picked up my car keys. She looked up at me, her eyes searching for hesitation.
There wasn't any.
I walked past her without stopping. Outside, the cold air stung against my skin. I opened the car door, slid into the driver's seat, and gripped the wheel.
I didn't have a destination. I didn't need one.
I turned the key, and the engine roared to life.
Then I drove away and didn't look back.